So how this will work is that I will make 5 statements. Out of the 5 statements, one is false. And I always get asked, is this a trick question? No, there is actually one false statement. Not all of them are true. So I will make the 5 statements, and then I believe the SU team will launch a quick poll. So if you could just enter in the number that you think that statement is false, that would be great. So statement number 1, JP Morgan has launched its own coin and it is currently in use. Statement number 2, Facebook has launched its own coin and will be in use by this year. Statement number 3, countries around the world have launched national level strategies to support the advancement of blockchain for future finance. Statement number 4, 20% of financial institutions, based on the latest survey, claim that they have exposure to cryptocurrencies. Statement number 5, you can convert a Tesla to mine for Bitcoin. So these are the 5 statements of fact. So that brings us to statement number 4. Statement number 4 is actually false. So instead of 20% of financial institutions having exposure to cryptocurrencies, the latest survey actually indicates 36%. So you might be surprised that some of the most traditional and unexpected names actually do have exposure to the world of cryptocurrencies. So this 169-year-old, very traditional, very conservative insurance player in the US has actually invested 100 million in Bitcoin. It is not a large investment in the bigger scheme of the market, but it is extremely interesting in the sense that one of the most traditional conservative players in the US has been able to make this investment. So you can just imagine the kind of regulatory hoops that it had to jump through even to make this investment happen. So you can see some of the more traditional, conservative, untraditional players very much so are starting to get into the game. And some of the other largest news, some of which you might have already heard about, is Square starting to put 1% or has already put 1% of its total assets into Bitcoin. Not huge still, but that is decently large, committing a portion of all of their assets. Similarly, you have a billion-dollar public company called MicroStrategy moving a lot of its capital into Bitcoin. In fact, not only moving its capital into Bitcoin, but actually raising $650 million more just so that it could invest it all into Bitcoin. So this last piece of news that you may have likely heard about is obviously pension funds getting into Bitcoin. So some of the most traditional players getting into the space. And so what's interesting is that across very traditional insurance players to fintech, to even public companies, all the way up to large pension funds, they're all starting to get exposure into the world of cryptocurrencies. And so the next obvious question might be, why are these people all getting access? And why are they all of a sudden interested in getting exposure? Well, actually, one of the fundamental reasons that we can look at is really the fact that cryptocurrencies, unlike any class of assets. In fact, when you look at numbers, cryptocurrencies compared to other classes of assets, it is the least correlated. And so when financial institutions are looking to further diversify their investments and looking to essentially lower their expected return and increase overall returns, they're looking to overall diversify further. And so for them, the world of cryptocurrencies enabled by blockchain as a technology has been able to essentially create a new asset class that enables for further diversification. And so that's really the logic why a lot of these different players across the board have started to get in. So a lot of happening in this space, but that makes the 5th statement true. And this is how you can rewire a Tesla to help mine for Bitcoin.